Well, hello, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be with you again, and thank you so much for inviting me back. This is a great pleasure and a great honor for me to be with all of you. And I see a number of people here who I sent notices to that this was going to be on, and I'd just like to say how pleased I am to see you here, Ivor and Colleen and many other people, friends of mine, people who know me. Um, and of course, those I don't know, very nice to meet all of you. And I suppose I should preface this by saying that I grew up in South Africa, and it was during the heydays of apartheid. So, I had experience of a society that was a very troubled one. And even though I was very young, it was very clear to me that things were not entirely as they should be, because I had lots of occasions when I saw rather ugly events happening during the days when black people on the streets had to carry a what they called a passport. It was looked like a little passport, really. And if you didn't have, if the black person did not have the right permission to be in a white area at any specific time, that person could be arrested immediately and sent back to their tribal homeland. Whether they'd ever been there or not was irrelevant. Whether they were born there or not was also irrelevant. But if you were a Zulu or a Xhosa or a Tswana or a Sotho, there were 11 major tribes in South Africa. And back in those days, a lot of the black people were born in urban areas on the outskirts of major cities. So, if their papers and their permissions and their documentation ran out, they would be sent back to the sticks where they'd never been before. And it was a very, very gruesome situation. However, I had wonderful, as a child, I was an only child, I had lots of marvelous, we were privileged whites. And so we all had nannies. And I had a wonderful nanny who introduced me to a topic that we discussed last time, so I'm not going to repeat all of that again. But she introduced me to the fact that a lot of her friends, my nanny's friends, who lived just down the road from where we lived, were practicing herbalists and, if you like, shamans who saw people and healed them by dispensing medication from barks and berries and herbs and leaves and all sorts of things that they would collect out in the field and come back and create medicinal products that would actually help these people. But these so-called shamans who went under the name of Sangoma, which is a Zulu word, which means healer or soothsayer or anyone who can see beyond the normal realms that most of us can see, these individuals could also communicate with those people's ancestors. The African paradigm is always communicating with the ancestors. So if you needed some sort of identification of an illness that you may have, or you were having a psychological problem, or you had a loss, or you were not sure of what to do, or whatever the situation was, this shaman would go into a semi-trance, throw the bones, which I explained in great detail during my last talk, so I won't repeat it now. And by looking at the bones, the shaman would give this person an explanation. Oh, your husband's ran off, or the money is hidden under the bed over there, or you've got this illness because of this, that, and the other. And if you take a little bit of this, which the shaman then mixed up, you'll get better. And you didn't have to necessarily drink the stuff, but you could use it. You could sprinkle it into a bath. You could do a ritual bath. You could do a ritual wash, and so on. So it was an amazing insight for me into the fact that, there is another way of seeing the world. We whites, of course, if anything was wrong with you, you'd call the family doctor. But when I saw what these people were doing, I was absolutely amazed. And as I grew up, I had more and more experience of this. And finally, when my folks moved away from South Africa, primarily because of the apartheid system, my father immigrated all the way to Central Africa, to a place that in those days was known as Northern Rhodesia. Today it's called the Republic of Zambia. And I followed them. And when I went up there, I had more experience of these healers. In my first experience in television, I worked for the first television station. in Central Africa, and it was extraordinary. So why am I telling you all of this? The subject is supposed to be animals, because those people gave me an incredible respect for the natural world, that the natural world wasn't a place outside of your window or a place that you went to on vacations. The natural world was very much a part of your life. You could tap into the forces of the natural world if you understand it and respect it. And that's one of the ways that they would find the sources for their medications that they would use, or their little stones and pebbles and other objects that they would use for divination, to foretell the future, to understand a patient's psychological problems. And I found that absolutely extraordinary. And then I had lots of experiences with animals as a child. I always had a pet, and my mother was a great animal lover. She grew up on a farm. My father was an immigrant from Latvia, but my mother was a South African, and so she understood what animals were all about, and so she gave me a love for animals, and together with my experience of this African healing system, shamanism, sangomas, if you like. I nurtured and developed a great respect for the natural world, and I was very fortunate to be able to do that. And I'm going to give you a little story. I hope I haven't told this before, but in 1967, I was involved in the making of a documentary of 3 big white hunters who had come out to Africa from the United States to do a safari. In other words, it was a trophy hunting safari that they were doing. And the only reason why I took the job was because hunting wild animals never ever made any sense to me whatsoever. I did not understand where the thrill or the fun was in shooting wildlife for fun in order to put a pair of antlers up on the wall. What was that about? That's why I took the job. And the main leader of, or if you like, the hunter who came out from California on this particular safari was a very, very wonderful, really nice guy by the name of Arthur Millen. Spud Millen was his name. And he had a major toy company called Whammo Toys. And Whammo had made millions and millions of dollars around the world by distributing a thing called the hula hoop. And if any of you were old enough to remember those days of the hula hoop in the 50s and the 60s, everybody was jiggling away with a hula hoop. This company made a fortune out of it. And eventually Spud made even more money by marketing a thing called the frisbee. Today on every beach, from Bondi Beach in Australia to Malibu Beach here in California, you will always find frisbees being thrown around. It's a requirement, right? So Spud made a great deal of money, and he was the head of these 3 guys who came out from California on safari, and they wanted a documentary made about their adventures, killing animals. So I took the job purely out of curiosity. Anyway, came the day where it was the turn of one of these hunters. He happened to be a stockbroker from Los Angeles. It was his turn to shoot an elephant. Now we had 2 leaders of the safari, two white guys, and this was taking place in a country called Mozambique, which is just to the east of South Africa on the Indian Ocean. And it was this particular guy's turn to shoot his elephant. And we tracked a herd of elephant on foot for 3 days before we could actually find a position where it would be safe enough to actually for this guy to take a shot. It was a long, unpredictable. We didn't expect to be tracking them as long as we did. We had no supplies, we had no water, we had no food, but we tracked them on foot. And I was carrying this very, very heavy film camera. This is long before the days of video. So I had this film camera, and I had an assistant with me carrying a very, very heavy battery pack that was connected to the camera in order to film this safari. And came the day where it was his turn to shoot the elephant. So this white hunter says to this American, "You see the herd, they're over there. On the right-hand side, there's an old bull. Now, he's no longer the big honcho. He's no longer head of the herd. He's been replaced by younger elephants. You can take him out. In other words, he's dispensable. But make sure that you get a good shot, because if you miss, it's not going to be an easy situation for us. We have no idea what may happen. So don't miss. Anyway, the white hunter stood behind me. The American stood in front of me with his rifle, pointing his rifle at this bull that he was intending to kill. And I was behind him, and in my frame, I had him, and in the background was the herd. And I thought, it's a great shot to see what he was doing. When he fired, you know, my expectation was that the bull would fall in the background, and that would be the scene. So he did shoot, and he missed. And there was absolute chaos. The herd went completely berserk. There was dust and trumpeting and noise and chaos everywhere. And all I could hear behind me was the white hunter saying to me, "Run, run, run, run." But I couldn't move for a number of reasons. I was stunned as to what was happening. And I had this very, very heavy camera. And I wasn't quite sure what was going to happen. So I just kept rolling. I was rolling film. And then the American who was in front of me, he suddenly ran out of the shot. And then I saw why. Because a female elephant was charging him, running straight towards him at full whack. I had no idea what the speed was, but you know, she couldn't stop. She was heading straight towards him and me because I was standing right behind him. She would have run right into me and killed me. Of that, there is absolutely no question. But he'd run out of my frame. I was petrified. I couldn't move. And all I could hear was this white hunter saying to me, "Run, run, run." And at the very, very last minute, this elephant, she must have been maybe 8 or 10 feet away from me. I heard bam. And the white hunter, who was head of this expedition, shot her. It was a clean shot right between her eyes. And she dropped on down to all fours. And she was staring at me. Now, the object of her anger was not me. It was the white hunter who had now run away. But all she could see was me. And all I could see was her eyes. I was still running film. And she slowly collapsed. And her eyes and my eyes locked together. It was the most extraordinary feeling I've ever had. I was watching this poor creature die in front of me. And her eyes were locked with mine. I was overwhelmed with a terrible, terrible, terrible sense of sadness and tragedy. And it was only revealed as she sort of keeled over. The reason why she attacked us is because she had a baby. In the background was a calf. She was protecting her calf. And a very, very strange thing had happened. As she was dying, I knew that there was some kind of very, very strange metaphysical connection that took place between that animal and I. And as her eyes glazed over and she died, I honestly felt that she and I made a connection. Well, let's cut the story short, and I don't want to terrify you and disturb you anymore. And I know this is very upsetting to hear this, but that night we're sitting at camp, back at base camp, and the martini is flowing, and the booze is flowing, and the hunters are drinking. And I was sitting nurturing my thoughts in a corner of this lovely rondable on the side of this beautiful river in Mozambique, absolutely gorgeous country. And as I was sitting there thinking about it, I thought, you know, today I could have been killed today by that elephant, but she didn't do that. In fact, what she did was, I feel that she's almost joined me. She and I are now connected. I felt that very, very strongly. And I'll tell you a very, very strange thing, that over the years, I consulted many of these sangomas myself for a variety of reasons. Number one, making films about them, but also because I had gone back to Africa. I had developed a rather serious autoimmune disorder that was affecting my kidneys. And although I had access to the best doctors and nephrologists, probably, you know, in America, here in LA, I wasn't getting any better. And I have a friend who is a surgeon, not too far away from where I live, about an hour away, who's also South African, and he's my age. And he said to me, you know, I am studying the ways of the African Sangomas because I want to understand how and why their medication works as effectively as it does. These people don't come from traditional academic institutions. Nobody's been to a pharmacological school, and yet the medicine that they get from the bush seems to work. I want to know why. So he was studying that. And he said, why don't you come with me? Make a little documentary about that with me. And maybe you can consult some of these shamans, the Sangomas, and maybe they can help you. And I said, Dave, you're kidding me. Are you actually suggesting, you're a surgeon, and you're suggesting that I see a witch doctor to help me with my illness? And he said, yes, that's exactly what I'm telling you to do. Because there's more to medicine than we know. This is the first time I heard a medical practitioner from the allopathic world, Western medicine, even think that way. So I said, without any hesitation, I said, yes, I'll go back to Africa with you. Maybe I can find a cure. So the extraordinary thing was that I went back with him, and every time I met a Sangoma and they threw the bones for me in order to diagnose my illness, the very, very, very first thing they said, and I'm talking about 6 or 8 times, different people, the very first thing they said to me was, what is this Ndlovu? And Ndlovu is a Zulu word for elephant. What is this elephant that I'm seeing in your bones? There is an elephant around you. This is years and decades after the event happened. They could still see the presence of that elephant. She's been with me all my life, ever since the day she died in front of me. And these people see it in the bones, which was another lesson for me. Not only the fact that that elephant is with me, and by the way, there are elephants all over my office. There's an elephant hanging from the rearview mirror of my car. I have elephants everywhere. I revere them. I honor them. I think they are the most extraordinary creatures. But that female elephant is still with me. And I know that she's almost, this sounds crazy. It sounds, you know, like some sort of, you know, fairy tale, but I feel that that creature is almost a guardian, helping me to protect me, to shield me from negative things, from disasters, from illnesses, you know, because here, the other extraordinary thing is that I was supposed to have succumbed to my illness 30 years ago, and I'm still around to tell the tale. And people always ask me, how come? What have you done? How come you survived this long? How come you're still going strong? You're supposed to be either on dialysis or dead. And I said, well, because I believe in the alternative, in the other paradigm, that there's another world outside of our Western way of thinking, outside of our normal parameters. I believe it, and I touch it, and I try to make it part of my life. And I always tell the story about this elephant, and they say, well, that's very interesting. And then they look at me as though I'm insane. But I know that that is the case. This elephant has been protecting me. She's been around me for all of these years. And I have to tell you that maybe that was one of the main catalysts that made it happen. But I think it happened long before that, during my childhood, and mainly as a result of my mother's guidance, if you like. I have a great respect for the animal kingdom, and I get on with all kinds of animals. And I've worked with rhinos, I have worked with lions, I have worked with all sorts of animals for the Discovery Channel, for Animal Planet, for National Geographic. Animals and I get along with one another. I'll tell you, I did a show for Animal Planet called Growing Up. This was about in the early 2000s. And the shows were all about baby animals, baby wild animals that had been discarded, rejected by their mothers for various reasons. Either the mother had died, or the mother no longer could support her baby, or give the child the baby food, or look after the baby properly, or the baby had been rejected by the male, which often happens in wild situations. And the one particular show I was working on was about a lynx whose name was Kisa, and she had been rejected by her mother because the baby's father became very aggressive when the baby was born, and he was attacking the baby and attacking the mother. So it was decided by keepers who eventually rescued this baby to bring her up under human care. And so the animal ended up at the San Diego Zoo, but she was young and she was aggressive because she was wild. And I would often go down there, and the film was about her growth, her growing up under human care. And the most extraordinary thing was, although this animal was absolutely wild and she wasn't very forgiving to people, she was quite aggressive when people came around. But every time she saw me, and every time I went to her cage, she would come running, bounding up to me, and she would put her paws up on the bars. And one day I said to the keeper, I said, you know, will you let me into the cage? I need to get a shot of her doing what she's doing, but I don't want the bars in the foreground. Can I go in there? And the keeper said, you are out of your mind. Don't even think about it. I said, right, why don't you give me a piece of paper to sign where I remove all responsibility from you. I will take full responsibility for what happens. Let me into the cage. And she very reluctantly, together with two other people from the zoo's administration, they were very anti the idea, but then they said, right, if you take responsibility and it's not our responsibility, go ahead and get your shot, get in the cage. They opened the door and I went to the cage. The very first thing Kisa did was she came bounding up and hugged me like this. And all I could feel was this hot breath next to me like this, and she was purring. And she and I became the greatest of friends. She never showed that kind of affection to anyone else. I think that animals know when you respect them. I think that animals can sense your feelings towards them. And any of us who have pets, dogs and cats, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But it can happen in the wild as well. And I had a similar situation with rhinos. There was a story about a baby rhino whose mother was unfortunately poached for her horn. You know, terrible, terrible tragedy. What's happening to the rhinos of Africa? They're basically being decimated. And people believe that the horn is made of keratin, which is the same material as your fingernails and your hair. You know, has absolutely no pharmacological qualities in it whatsoever. And yet people believe that it cures all sorts of things, primarily in Southeast Asia. And so the rhinos are being poached out of existence for nonsense, for absolute rubbish. But they are criminal gangs who make a great deal of money out of this. And so anyway, to cut a long story short, there was one particular mother who was killed, and she had a baby, and the baby was rescued. And so this film was about this baby being brought up in the wild by humans. That little rhino absolutely adored me. And after the filming took place in South Africa, and then she was transferred to Addo National Park, returned to the wild, hopefully for her to grow up in the wild. And so I let 6 months go by. I came back to the States, worked on the rest of the series. And then I went back to South Africa to go and do a progress report on her to see how she was doing. And we got to Addo National Park, and I was with one of the rangers. And I said, you know, how are we going to find her? And she had a name. And the ranger said, no, she knows her name. I'll whistle. And, you know, the ranger sort of whistled and called her name. And she eventually appeared out of the bush. She stood there. And when she saw me, this rhino, and she'd grown to 3 times her size. She was almost adult size already. When she saw me, she came up, bounding up towards me. And the ranger said, oh, my God. And you know, he took his rifle out. He was, you know, wanted to protect me. And I said, no, don't just leave her alone. It'll be fine. And he didn't believe me, but she came right up to me. And when she got to me, she stopped. She sniffed me. She knew exactly who I was. and she started munching on my shirt, you know, as a sign of affection. It was extraordinary. They had never seen anything like that. So I think, you know, our relationship with the animal kingdom is something that I needs to be developed and needs to be respected by more people. And the problem is, you know, what I call the great disconnect. We are so disconnected from the natural world in our urban hubs and behind our electronic screens and in our lifestyles that, you know, we've lost contact with what we used to have. And I think it's time that we get back to this return to nature and this return to respecting nature and the animal kingdom, and back to some kind of connection with the animal kingdom itself. And I know it's not possible for a lot of people to be able to do that. But when people ask me this question, well, what do you do? And, you know, how do we correct the situation, this disparity between humans and non-humans? The first thing I say is, if you're a parent and you have a child, the very first thing you do is take the child camping. Take the child into the wild. Get on a canoe, go down the river, smell the pine trees, depending on where you live, or the blue gum trees, or wherever it is, wherever you live in the world. Take the child back into nature. Climb a mountain. Spend a night under the stars. Let the child hear the insect buzz. Let the child watch the birds. You know, rekindle a connection with the natural world. And that will, you know, make a world of difference to that individual, your child's life. And I've seen it again and again and again with those people who do that. So it's very unfortunate that we've lost that touch with the natural world. And the way we treat animals is something that disturbs me more than I can ever begin to tell you. Not a day goes by where I am not traumatized by something that comes across my desk or my computer screen or news of what we humans do to the animal world. And I think it's time that we reassess that by making it public, because most people really do not know what honestly does go on in terms of the way we treat the non-human world. We hear a lot about people, and of course that's correct. We have to care for the underprivileged. We have to care for the underdog. We have to care for victims, no matter who they are. And of course, humans come first. But what you never hear about are the animals. But we're equal. We all share this planet together. And the fact that we humans, you know, may be upright standing creatures with opposing thumbs, which allows us to make and use tools and implements. So we might be more intelligent, and we might be able to make weather satellites, and we might be able to do all sorts of wonderful things, making MRI machines. Animals can't do that. But does that really make us superior? I don't think so. It just makes us more intelligent. It doesn't make us better. And I don't think that we give enough credit, and I don't think that we give enough respect to the animal kingdom. And I would do anything I possibly can to try and correct that situation, to give people, particularly young people, an awareness of the animal kingdom. Most people, as far as they're concerned, they go into a supermarket, all they know about animals are little bits of flesh in plastic containers in the freezers. But those were all living, sentient, feeling creatures who live lives of unmitigated hell in factory farms today. What goes on in factory farms is absolutely appalling. And we have to reassess, we have to change the situation. I'm pleased to see that there are some countries, particularly in Europe, I think Denmark, and I think some of the Scandinavian countries, and maybe one or two others, you know, have passed rules and regulations outlawing the farrowing crate for pigs, where mother pigs are in a cage. They cannot even turn around their whole lives. They're trapped in these cages. They've outlawed that. And in some countries, the caging of battery-laying hens has also been outlawed. But here in the United States and in most other countries, it still goes on. And I think it's time to end all of this. And if we really knew where our food, the eggs and the milk and the feathers that go into your pillows, you know, the leather that goes into your purse and your belt, the animal that becomes the steak on your plate, you know, we've got to know where it comes from and what kind of lives those poor creatures led. And so this is my mission. More than anything else, and people have heard me talk about this again and again and again, it sounds like I'm the old-fashioned, you know, broken record. I keep repeating myself, but I won't stop. We have to do something to change our relationship with the non-human world. And I would love to hear from any of you as to suggestions as to how you think we might be able to do this and what can be done. I have my answers, and I know what I'm trying to do. One of the things I'm trying to do at the moment is I'm writing a feature film which has this as its central core, its central topic is this, but it's not in your face. I don't want to lecture to the audience, but I do want to have it running as an underlying theme in the movie, so that there is the idea is planted in the audience's mind. You know, oh, I see. That's oh, well, I didn't realize that. You know, I want that aha moment to happen. That the piece of chicken that one eats, or whatever it is that you eat as part of your diet, you know, once had a life and once had feelings. And you know, the highlight for far too many animals today is their death, because prior to that, their lives are hell. And you know, during the pandemic, I was absolutely mortified to learn a lot of slaughterhouses here in the United States, people were getting COVID. And so these smaller slaughterhouses were closing down because people were getting sick. And so the larger slaughterhouses were taking on a bigger load. What was the answer? The answer was increase the slaughter speed, increase the line speeds. And under our previous administration, it was actually a directive from Washington to a lot of slaughterhouses, increase the line speeds of the animals so that you can slaughter more per day. And of course, slaughterhouses, as you may well or may not know, animals are not killed immediately, they are bled to death. And how do you do that? Well, the way they do that in slaughterhouses, and I'm sorry if I'm going to upset anybody who does not know this, you know, they're hung upside down and they are bled to death after their throats are cut. Well, if you increase the slaughterhouse line speeds, where a chicken is slaughtered every 1.5 seconds and pigs at the same rate, you're not killing properly and you're not stunning them properly. And it's not a painless death. It's horrifying. 80% of the poultry that die in America, and I forget the number, but it's an astounding number of billions of animals. 80% of those animals don't die on the slaughter lines, but they die by being boiled to death when they are plunged into boiling water to remove the feathers from their bodies. Do people know this? No, of course they don't. Does the meat industry tell them this? Absolutely not. Do we ever see it or hear it on the news or on television? Never. The commercials make it look like everything is fine and dandy. Have a great time, go out and have a barbecue, you know, or throw it on the barbie, as you would say in Australia. But all of these animals had lives and sentience, and they had sensitivities, and they had a consciousness, and they suffered terribly for what became of them in order to become lunch or to become our meal at the picnic. And I really think that people need to be informed about this because it is hidden from view. I think Paul McCartney years ago said, you know, if slaughterhouses had walls, everybody would be a vegetarian. I'd like to believe that, but slaughterhouses don't have walls, and neither do the factory farms where these animals are kept before they go to slaughter, because if they had glass walls, we certainly would become vegetarians, because what goes on in those places is just absolutely horrendous.
Lionel, it's a real problem for us in the spiritualist movement, because a lot of our spiritualist teachers talk exactly as you do, it's one of the most contentious areas. When you start talking even to spiritualists about vegetarianism, you get a lot of flack. I know in our forums, whenever we start talking about veganism or vegetarianism, a lot of spiritualists will become very, very hostile. And they resent what they call, any videos about cruelty, they just don't want to see it. Lionel, we've got this other movement. We've got this humanization of pets.
Yes.
Which is, I think, another thing that you might have some thoughts about. On the one hand, we've got, this dreadful treatment of animals, and yet people spending billions of dollars
Yes.
to turn their pets into little people.
Yes, exactly.
Do you have any thoughts on that one?
Well, it never made any sense to me. You love this one, you eat the other one. I mean, there is no difference. And I don't think people make that connection yet. Your cat and your dog are as much a member of your family as any member of your family. And yet, there are other animals that we eat, and we don't even give a second thought. But I'll tell you something very interesting. Some years ago, we have a large annual exhibition here in Los Angeles every year. It's an expose of equipment for the motion picture industry, new technologies, new lighting equipment, new sound recording equipment, and all sorts of things, and services that supply the motion picture industry. And there's a company here called Animal Actors here in LA. And some years ago, and every year they have a different animal on display at this exhibition, which goes on for 3 days. And they show you what this particular animal can do in terms of being an actor on your set, be it a dog or a cat or a horse or whatever. But one year they had a chicken. There was this white hen sitting on this woman's lap. And people saying, well, what does she do, other than lay an egg? And the woman said, well, look at this. And she put the chicken down on the floor. This animal knew 18 different commands. The animal knew go forward, stop, action, which meant that the animal knew that it was being photographed, turn left, turn right. This was a chicken. It was an eye-opener. Chickens are far more intelligent. There's a wonderful organization here in the United States run by a woman called Karen Davis called United Poultry Concerns. I don't know if any of you know about her. And she is a phenomenal lady. And she has a bunch of pet chickens on her farm. She rescues animals, and she has this incredible shelter. But she runs this very active organization promoting to the public the fact that chickens need more respect than they get. They are the most abused and used animals in the meat industry, as you know. But they have the capacity to be intelligent, to understand you, and to develop a relationship with you. There's a wonderful YouTube video, which I'm sure some of you may have seen, because I'm sure, I look at things like that all the time. There's a scene of a man who had a pet goose, and he goes to the farm. He's been away for the day, and the goose sees him from the other side of the farm, and this goose comes running up to him, almost flying towards him, and then takes her wings and enfolds him with her wings. She loves him. It's as clear as a bell that this animal has a great feeling for her caregiver. There's an emotional capability that this animal has. And I think they all have that. Lily, you're absolutely right. And what you're saying, I know exactly what you're talking about. I have this all the time. You talk to people and they're turned off, or there's anger, or there's hostility. I've experienced that time and time and time and time again. I think part of the reason for that is because it's still such a new topic. This is the last frontier of change that we need to bring about on the planet. We've been there. Human, racism has, to a large extent, disappeared compared to what it used to be on the planet. The feminine movement, the gay rights movement, all of these movements. The animal rights movement, the animal welfare movement is the last of the major issues that is being brought to the public's consciousness. And it's the newest and the latest, and it's the most, a lot of people see it as the most extreme because it's still so very, very new. I find that if you talk to young people about this, they are far more amenable to this. And in fact, I found a lot of young people are actually teaching their parents. You know, mom and dad don't want to hear about this. But little Jimmy and Johnny and Jill and Joan, you know, they come home and they say, I don't want to eat this chicken anymore. I don't want to do this. And I don't want to eat turkey on Thanksgiving anymore because it's been killed. I don't want to do that. And the parents find that objectionable. But the young people are open to these ideas. And I think that as this slowly percolates up to the surface of society and we start thinking about it, and it becomes a political and a social and an economic issue as well as as an ethical one, people will slowly begin to change. But I have to say that I agree with you. It's a very, very difficult issue. And I no longer spend too much time talking to people over the age of about 35 or 40 because there's too much resistance. I will talk to younger people about that. By the way, I made a film I think it was 2003 called A Sacred Duty. You can watch it on YouTube. And when we first brought out the film, it met with a great deal of resistance. But since it came out, a lot of people have said, you changed my life. You changed my eating habits. You changed my way of looking at the world. And you changed the way I saw my relationship with the rest of creation. And so it takes time for this to happen, but it's still so very new. It's the last of the major issues that I think we as a society are facing.
Yes, thank you so much for your presentation before and this one today. Just a wonderful storyteller that you are.